How's it going, everyone? My name is Jake, and today I want to talk to you about sound. Sound is the base fundamental concept of music production. Music is sound, so I think it'd be rather important to understand the physics of this phenomenon and how it's perceived in nature. There's quite a lot to talk about, so let's get right into it. Physically, sound is the compression and rarefaction of molecules created by a vibrating membrane, like our vocal cords. Let's call this membrane our sound source for now. So the sound source creates this compression and rarefaction of molecules, but how does this translate into what we hear? I'm going to break it down into three sections: pitch, amplitude, and time. Pitch is often referred to as frequency, which is measured in hertz. Hertz describes how many compression and rarefaction cycles these vibrating molecules go through in a period of 1 second. So the pitch of a sound is determined by how fast these molecules are moving. Higher frequencies have more cycles per second, lower frequencies have less. Pitch is very interesting because it is what gives music its character. Isn't it crazy that rhythmically oriented pitches can create such an emotional reaction? This brings up a good point. What we hear and the actual physics of sound are not the same thing. That's why there are two totally different studies known as acoustics and psychoacoustics. These are the studies of sound in nature and how humans perceive sound respectively. Also, maybe you've heard of the term frequency response, maybe seen it on the spec sheets on a microphone or a set of studio monitors. It is usually detailed by a frequency map of how that piece of gear responds to certain frequencies in the spectrum, and our ears essentially do the same thing. This trait is why we study specifically how humans hear sound. The best way that I can think to demonstrate how we hear is to show you with an oscillator. Okay, so here are two different oscillators. One is at 2 kilohertz at minus 20 dB. You can tell it's pretty loud. Now let's listen to 14 kilohertz at that same level. So you see, even though they are at the same level, your ears can much more efficiently hear 2 kilohertz. Depending on how you're listening, you may not even be able to hear this oscillator. The next character of sound is amplitude. Amplitude is perceived as loudness, and we often measure this in some variation of decibels. So what part of sound physics relates to amplitude? Amplitude relates to the maximum displacement of molecules created from the sound source, essentially with how much intensity the sound source is pushing on these molecules. Just think of the pressure created from a jet engine or a 40 kilowatt sound system. Now what about a mosquito or a snap of the fingers? This is why if we listen to something too loud, we can actually do physical damage to our ears. Needless to say, there are many small and delicate parts within your ear, and high sound pressure levels can easily damage these necessary elements. We do have ways of measuring amplitude to know what generally is too loud. This measurement is decibels. Decibels are arbitrary measurements that are logarithmic in nature. They are arbitrary because amplitude is measured in many different ways. You've got the dBA scale, which is weighted towards how humans actually hear frequency. It is less sensitive to frequencies at the extremes of our hearing and more sensitive to frequencies in the middle of our hearing spectrum. dBc, which is on the other end of the spectrum, is measured with a nearly flat frequency response, and dBb is the middle ground of these standards. dBA is most oftenly used because it is more relevant to preventing hearing loss in humans than the other scales. Our last characteristic of sound is time. I actually find this topic very fascinating because it is not so much describing what the sound is, but where it is. For all those music producers out there, reverb is a process of time. We know that sound is created from a sound source, and from there it creates this type of cyclical reaction of compressing and rarefaction molecules. This cycle is projected away from the sound source until it comes in contact with another object. From there, the sound will be reflected in a whole manner of ways, depending on what the object is and how absorptive or reflective it is. If you really pay attention, you can gather a lot of information about the room you are in just from listening to how your voice reverberates off the different surfaces. The measurement for the sound characteristic is, well, seconds, milliseconds, nanoseconds, normal but really small measurements of time. And I mean, this makes sense that there are small increments. Sound travels at 767 miles per hour without an outside force. So if it's going to reach any physical obstructions, it will not take too long for it to do so. Even if you could imagine a wall or surface far enough away, sound fades on a logarithmic scale just as it grows. so it'd be too soft for us to hear it when the reflections return from that faraway obstruction. And that will conclude this concept video on sound. Hopefully you understand how these three characteristics, pitch, amplitude, and time, all play a part in how we perceive the phenomenon of sound and how these characteristics can affect us. Let me know if you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and subscribe for more music production and music industry related content. And until next time everyone, have a good day.